Thank you, everybody, for attending this evening. My name is Renee Gagnon. I had the privilege of being one of the first of the licensed producer crops a few years ago, and then I had the chance to go out into the world after our company went public and I was bought out. And what I discovered when I went out into the world and I got to travel into the United States was an important consideration about diversity and equity. And diversity seems to be a scary word, but if you think about it, we believe in it for ecologies. We like to know that the environment is diverse. We understand that it's important for forests and for other environments. And we understand what happens when that environment becomes suddenly too much one way, or one thing becomes dominant. So what I wanted to talk about is how economics and economic systems require diversity in them. The Canadian cannabis industry has great potential to lift many groups that have been excluded from past economic booms. And we've had First Nations on stage discussing the potential impact for it. But it has an even bigger and wider impact on women in the community who've been the backbone, essentially, of a lot of the products that have been made over the decades. And especially in the maker community, we're going to see an incredible transition between the pre-legal and the post-legal, and there's consequences to it. In culture, we talk about diversity when we refer to the fact that we have immigration. We talk about multiculturalism. We talk about the benefits that are brought. And then we have to deal with sometimes some of the pain that comes from the growth of it. But throughout that time, you have to understand that diversity also breeds resilience into what it touches. It allows for change to occur and the whole organism, the whole culture, to survive those changes. Corporations are also ecosystems, and they depend on diversity. And we've had a hard time building parity into corporations, bringing up the gender gap. We've had difficulties in including minorities into those corporations. And we have a very hard time bringing gender parity to those boards of directors that run those corporations. And yet, when those companies don't represent the makeup of their consumers, you don't actually have a very fair chance of satisfying those consumers or meeting the market. You have to represent the market that you face, which is why diversity is just good business. And I want to talk about the fact that cannabis offers the first opportunity for an industry that has no established, entrenched players and an ability to exclude entire groups. A few years ago, women made up 47% of the cannabis leadership in the United States. That number's fallen to 30%. That's not an optimistic trend. And the only way that we can advance it forward is through equity. And in places like California, it's become a legislated component. In cities like Los Angeles, equity is a requirement now within the distribution of the licenses. So many licenses have to go to minority and women-owned businesses to prevent what is essentially a complete wholesale transfer from one state where brown and people of color paid predominantly the penalty for supplying largely the white community with their narcotics for so many decades. It's a way of ensuring equity. Canada's seen no such equity in that level. There's been approximately 5 of the licensed producers set up, owned, and created by females in this country. There's more to come, but that's an unreasonable number considering the total number. We need more equity. We need more equity in the supply chain. We need more equity at every level that we can get involved with because we are at ground zero. This is a blue ocean. We talk about the billions and trillions. That needs to be a lot more thought put into how we distribute, how we want that to do, and only at the beginning of an industry do you ever have this chance. And I want to suggest that tomorrow is a celebration, but it's also a mourning. I want you to understand that there's thousands of people got laid off this past week at all the dispensaries across Canada. There's families in British Columbia that don't know what's happening next month with their rent. There's landlords that now have empty locations because the legislation wasn't ready in the various provinces. So there's going to be pain. But along with that is finally the injustice of being arrested for the mere possession of plant tissue is going to go away. Suddenly, we're not going to see people losing their children. We're not going to see families ripped apart, people not being able to pursue careers because of a criminal conviction for plant tissue. And we're going to see patients being able to gain greater access to one of the most revolutionary health changes since penicillin. If you look at the range of possible conditions that cannabis applies to, we suddenly see hope for a lot of patients that have been left marooned and medication can't help them. They've been forced to self-treat. They've been forced to go to dispensaries, to compassion clubs, and the brave souls that started those paid a heavy price early on. And I want to acknowledge them in the dying days of the gray and the black and the many decades that all these people toiled and invented and created and suffered and went through great pain. And I want to say thank you to them, and I want to say thank you to you for continuing this dialogue. And I want to ask you that you think about equity, and that if we're going to proceed down this bold new path, that we have a chance to address some of the historical wrongs. This doesn't take away from anything. This is practically the first source of free revenue that we can devote to some of the worst social ills of many generations. And I want to thank you most of all for tomorrow starting forward, helping us as a country change a planet's view of one plant, and then hopefully we can start addressing the other lunacies around the other plants, which haven't hurt anybody either. So I want to thank you.